There are many ways in which mental health treatment is such a strange process. We often ask clients to talk about their challenges, which may involve conflict associated with friends and families. But what happens when culturally there are variations in discussing personal and family issues in therapy? And what about conversations involving trauma in the context of South Asians that might be unique? And how do we take mental health interventions beyond the individual level in South Asian populations? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Sen. Our guest today is Dr. Sheetal Siledar-Lee, a licensed psychologist in private practice. Dr. Siledar-Lee specializes in trauma treatment, particularly in the context of interpersonal partner violence, women's issues, and she speaks 4 languages. As such, Dr. Siledar-Lee is able to serve immigrant populations, South Asians, and the general community. In addition to her clinical specialty, Dr. Siledar-Lee has published a self-help guide on An Anxious Mind's Guide to Aromatherapy, and was guest on a podcast focusing on South Asian mental health titled Between Friends, Conversations with Maitri. Today, Dr. Siledar-Lee, a South Asian East Indian psychologist, will be discussing mental health treatments and resources regarding trauma and abuse in the South Asian population. Dr. Siledar-Lee, thank you so much for joining us and welcome today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. I appreciate it.
You know, we're getting into a heavy topic today about trauma and abuse, particularly in the South Asian population. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you got in this particular area of treatment?
I would say, firstly, I would like to acknowledge that this is a very heavy topic. And if you need, please take a break, take some deep breaths, get a glass of water if you need to. Self-care is a priority. So, having said that, I'll come back to your question. I got into this topic of trauma or the area of trauma because of my own personal experience in life. Till I went to grad school and was pursuing my doctorate, I did not realize that I was a victim of trauma and abuse myself. And once I realized that, I think it was an eye opener for me to work on myself, but also to be able to help the community and to be able to provide support. Because I feel if I had received that support early on, things would have been very different for me and my family. So
Wow,
that was my very, very first, I would say, experience that kind of drifted me towards working on trauma.
wow. I'm sorry that that was an experience that you went through. Now, because I think the topic of trauma and abuse in the South Asian population in general is rarely discussed. When we think about trauma and abuse, can you paint a picture or describe to us what would be within this category?
Absolutely. I will focus a little bit specifically about the South Asian community and what trauma or abuse could look like in that community. I think a lot of times people in general, not just in this community, but in general, do not realize that they are being abused or they're going through trauma. A lot of things fall under trauma. I mean, we've all had a collective trauma of being in the pandemic and going through something that globally affected everybody. So we all have experienced collective trauma. And I think in history, as there has been record of the World War, the pandemic, the global pandemic is going to be one of the other things that is going to be a significant event that was experienced worldwide and a significant traumatic event, to be precise. So things like that can be traumatic. Losing a loved one, having some kind of serious illness, all of that can be traumatic. But more specifically, things that people do not realize is when we talk about abuse, abuse can be traumatic as well. And it leaves a long lasting impression on your physical, mental health, as well as your perception about the world, because you do not feel safe. And abuse, physical abuse, is usually the thing that most people think of as the form of abuse. but there can be mental or emotional abuse as well as financial abuse. And one of the big aspects of financial abuse in the South Asian community is this concept of dowry, where there is demands made on the bride and her family to pay money or to bring in goods and items or buy expensive things for the groom and his family. And it's not just during the wedding, but it continues throughout. And this is one of the most common things, but culturally, they do not consider it as an abuse. So this is something to be mindful of with this community, that when things like this happen, that you're being abused and you can seek help. Again, there are a lot of examples of emotional or mental abuse where the female is not allowed to go see her family, or there are restrictions on what she can and she cannot do. She does not have access to funds and she has to be dependent on her spouse for money. A lot of times within the United States, we see that there is emotional abuse because of visa status. The woman has married the man and is here on a green card and is dependent because the green card is provisional and is based on the marriage. And so that is another thing where we have seen a lot of power struggle, where that has been used as a bait to have her do whatever is needed, or to abuse her, or to constantly bring that up, and emotional blackmail happening. So these are all different forms of abuse that sometimes people don't even realize that they're being abused and manipulated into the situation. And obviously, gaslighting, that is a big part of emotional abuse.
First of all, thanks for clarifying that because I think most people think of abuse as physical abuse. Rarely do they consider the what the emotional abuse might look like, or instrumental types of abuse like the financial abuse, and particularly in the South Asian population. I'm also curious too, because when we think about just Asian culture, and South Asian culture is a very community collective driven type of network. So in these abuse contexts, just, out of curiosity, are family members also pulled into the abuse, like because dowries are involved and it's not just one person. So I'm just kind of curious, are also family members being involved in some way? And that's the first part of the question. And of course, second part of the question is, what does intervention look like in this context?
Mhm. Absolutely. Jack, what you said is very true. It's a collectivistic culture. So we do everything collectively. And that is one of the strengths of this culture and one of the very, very strong fortes, which can be helpful and healing. But on the other side, yes, when it comes to trauma and abuse, that happens collectively as well. So families are involved in that abuse. It's not just an individual. Usually you will see that if not actively, passively, they're supporting it by not saying anything, not stopping the perpetrator. That's also a form of abuse. When you do not stop abuse from happening, you're supporting it. So, you are in some ways encouraging it. So yes, that does happen. And it's not just specific that, it's the groom's family that is abusing the bride. It could be her own family. I'm sure people here must have heard of the term honor killing. That's another big thing about the South Asian community, where your own family will decide to kill you, murder you, just because you were bringing them shame in some ways. It could be for something like marrying somebody from a different community, or trying to say no to a marriage proposal that came in. So a lot of these things are relative. I wouldn't say that this is generalized, but yes, these things still happen, and not only in remote parts of India or other South Asian countries. They happen very much in the United States and the United Kingdom, where we have a huge South Asian population.
It's very shocking to hear that that is still happening.
Yes. And the second part of your question was about the intervention. And the interventions are kind of challenging because in this situation, you cannot just work with one person, because working with one person is really not helpful. So a lot of psychoeducation, a lot of outreach in the community, educating people. As I was mentioning earlier, I summarized what abuse looks like, but educating the community of what abuse looks like, and maybe even providing them with just the idea of confidentiality, because that is unknown to this community. South Asian community does not understand things like boundaries or confidentiality piece. So making them aware about it so that they feel that there is a place where they can go talk to and they can try to get help. And also involving, community members like maybe priests, or whether they're with the Gurdwara, that's the Sikh temple, the mosque, the Hindu temple, whatever that might look like, involving community leaders where they can talk about these things. So educating those people as well. So think of it like we're working at a very macro level and not at a micro level. We're trying to address as many layers here as possible. So it's not just the individual, it goes beyond the individual and family into community and a much wider, where it could be like advertising through the radio. By advertising I mean psychoeducation through the radio or television, and educating the public as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you've also done a lot of talks and outreach in
Mhm.
this particular area.
Yeah.
Gosh, eh, it's just not a talked about. I mean, first of all, abuse in general is a very shameful topic. So many people don't talk
Mhm.
about that. But then to acknowledge that that even happens within our own community, like the Asian and South Asian
Mhm.
community, is also a very painful struggle to acknowledge. I guess, and thinking about this particular topic, you mentioned some of your history and how you got into this work, and thinking about, I guess, your central message, going back to providing mental health treatments and resources regarding trauma. What would you say to our listeners are important pieces to pay attention to, like therapists who are doing this work
Mhm.
and they have South Asian clients in front of them who have experienced some form of trauma?
One of the things I would say to other therapists who are new to the work or working with this population, that do not go by face value. A lot of times, South Asian community or South Asian individuals will come in and not say anything negative about their family, and they would have been referred because of like stress that they have reported or other physical health issues. A lot of times, mental health issues are more somatic in this community, so they are more open to getting help for physical health issues, like maybe headaches or stomach aches, which could be due to anxiety or depression, or other things like chronic pain that they're going through, or stress related migraines and things like that. So a lot of times the emphasis or focus will be on the physical health issues, but not going by the face value, and also at the same time constantly reassuring them about confidentiality, and trying to bring the focus back on psychoeducation, educating them about the trauma and making them feel safe and secure. I think that would be the first step, which will lead to probably more openness from the individual's end, where they will then feel safe to talk about other issues about their family. Family is a very, very protective factor. So when individuals come in, they feel they cannot say anything negative about their family, even if there is like their family of origin for that matter. If parents are putting a lot of pressure on the individual, this is something I see a lot in my work, where young adults come in and parents are pressurizing them to get married, or oh, you haven't been making enough progress, you should be making more progress in your professional front. So feeling that pressure and keeping in mind that you cannot take the individual away from the family in a South Asian community, because it's a very collectivistic culture. It's not that you're 18 and you turn and say goodbye to your family and do what you want. That's usually not how it is. So keeping in mind that these values and belief systems have to be integrated into your treatment and interventions, that would be helpful.
Huh. And thinking about integrating that into the interventions,
Mhm.
can you give me an example of how that would play out or what that would look like?
Mhm. Yeah, so a lot of times asking the individual, because they know best what their family situation is and what they can voice and what they cannot voice to their family, and empowering them. I think a lot of us need that encouragement, that power, because we don't really speak up to our elders. We do not speak up to our family. The belief is that, okay, if your elders say something, you have to just quietly listen to it and obey it because they have the wisdom and they say the right thing. But we know that, that's not always true. Sometimes that can be a challenge, but empowering them to be able to be assertive rather than aggressive, and maybe doing a lot of role play in session to give them that context, how it would look like when you actually do this. What are the possibilities that could come up? What is it that you can say? How, so get that practice, because you've never done it. It's, think of it like riding a bicycle. When you don't know how to write it, you keep practicing and then you can do it. So that's the same concept here, where you keep practicing and you role play in sessions, and then you can do it easily outside of session as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for illustrating that. Now,
Mhm.
so one thing too, you've already mentioned some of your personal challenges, something specific to our podcast, which is what we're always curious about the interplay between being a person of color and as well as the challenges that we may or may not experience. So, in thinking about this, in your career as a person of color, what were some challenges you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Yeah, Jack, I think that is a great question, because not just being a person of color, but being a person of color from India and a woman, I think it came with its own challenges. A lot of microaggression, things like, oh, you speak great English. And I would turn back and say, yeah, we were ruled by Britishers and English was our first language. So how would I not speak English? Being asked things like, oh, do elephants roam freely on the streets? And I come from Mumbai, which is a big city, kind of like in the United States, as you would compare it to New York City. And and I'm
Wait,
like,
so
I
people
had
are
never
asking that?
seen. Yes, absolutely. And these are people, grad school students, professors.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm not talking about a layman who's, never stepped out of the United States or not had formal education. These are people who've had exposure, formal education, saying things like this. And it was really shocking. And I think that was one of the reasons why I felt the need to continue sticking to my identity as a South Asian, East Indian female, because it was just considered that, oh, if you're somebody who is all of this, you cannot be smart, you cannot do these things. So I think that's why that identity stayed with me and will always stay with me. But yes, those microaggressions, comments like, oh, you're too young, do you even know how this works? And I guess one of the things was that Asians look younger than Americans, even if we are the same age. For some reason, it's just how our skin type or other things are. And I would have to try to prove myself to people that, okay, I am whatever my age, that is not what matters. It is what I bring to the table, what I offer you. So challenges like that, things that came up. And on the other hand, the other challenges being a person of color was my own community started judging me. It's like, oh, now you can read minds. We don't want to
Huh?
be around you. You're going to read minds.
Oh, because you were pursuing psychology? Is that?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So the mindset about the community is, psychology is almost like a
It's
black
woo woo.
magic or
Oh, black.
something.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
That
yes.
you can read people's minds and you can do all these things. You can kind of train them to do things that they wouldn't want to do. So yeah,
So you
challenges
weren't,
came from
yeah,
both
challenges
sides.
and yeah, came from both sides. Wow. Wow. Mm. And how did you overcome those challenges?
It was hard, I'll be honest, it was hard. There were days where I would feel like, is ever anybody going to take me seriously? is, are people going to value me enough as much as they value somebody who is light skinned and has, you know, wisdom showing on their face and age showing, which comes as one of the added factors, like a almost like a, feather in your cap. And so I think it took me a hard time. And I would say my self esteem was not great when I started this because, as I mentioned, I was a victim of abuse myself. So my self esteem was not great. But the biggest motivating factor for me was my daughter. I was a single mother for several years, and I knew that I was going to raise a child who wouldn't have to go through what I went through. So, being very mindful of that, I knew I had to model to her. I just wouldn't talk. I had to show it in actions. It's not just the words that matter, it's what she's seeing around her. So, that is what was my biggest motivator. I I did whatever I would envision her to do in life. I think that's how I lived my life, where I would be like, okay, if this was my daughter, what would I expect out of her? And that's what I did to myself. And that's how I was able to overcome all of that and put it all behind me. I still remember my very first year of grad school where I had to make I had to start working on my research proposal. And one of my professors told me, huh, if this is what you're going to do, I don't think you will ever get your doctorate. And I was able to earn my doctorate in 4 years. And I also published the self help guide, which is based on my doctoral research. And on the day of my graduation, he walked up to me and he said, "Oh, you did this." I said, "Yes, thank you for challenging me because it helped me motivate myself and do this because I knew I had to prove you wrong because I
Wow.
had the potential and I knew I could do it." So again, it was a male looking at a female of color and, kind of trying to tell me that, oh, your topic isn't good enough to make it into a research field in psychology. And I think, yes,
Not just
things
that, I
like
mean,
that
it's
challenge
published,
me.
it's on Amazon, it's and last I checked, it's 5-star rating, so I hope people get the book.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it. But yeah, those kind of things did happen. I would cry at night and motivate myself in the morning and take these challenges as, yes, motivators that would help me move forward and, get
Yeah.
things done.
Well, it's unfortunate that this type of pain is being used as a motivator, and it speaks to the tremendous challenge that oftentimes many women of color have to go through, and
Mhm.
for you to come front and center with the fact that people of authority are saying this to you that you won't make it if you
Mhm.
have to delay your research. So what if you need to delay your research?
Mhm.
Well, there are many things that are happening in life.
Mhm.
So it's unfortunate that you didn't get that support early on. So, in thinking about this idea of modeling for your daughter and this very solidified and grounded approach to who you are, to your identity, I love that. I'm wondering, what does it mean for you to be a South Asian East Indian psychologist?
It makes me really proud. It also makes me feel like I am in a position of power because in the South Asian community, we always look at doctors or anybody for that matter, somebody who's a professional or an expert in their field as authority. And so I feel that gives me a position of power where I can educate the community and I can really, really encourage them to seek help because we know that there is a lot of stigma associated with mental health in this community. And research clearly identifies that this community needs a lot of help. And this is the research is based on whatever we are seeing. So I think the rate of help that is needed is way more because most of the people are not even coming out. So they're not even being part of that research. So definitely there is a more need of help and being able to speak the languages and support the community. Growing up in India most of my adult life, understanding the values, belief systems, having firsthand experience of that, I think I'm able to bring in a lot that I can offer to the community. And that is my biggest, I'm hoping that that is going to be the biggest takeaway from this podcast is that people will be a little more open to seeking help for themselves, for their loved ones, people with substance use, people in domestic violence situations, any kind of trauma that they've gone through, just to be open to seeking help because it really helps.
All right. And Dr. Siledar-Lee, how can we support
Mhm.
you?
Good question, Jack. I would, if possible, my contact information can be shared with the listeners, and I am happy to reach out to the community. I do a lot of volunteer work in the community in the Bay Area and sometimes across the country. I recently just did a panel discussion across the United States, and I keep doing those kind of things. So I would be happy if people would even join in and listen because sometimes, we need to hear things over and over again till we feel ready to take action. But yes, I would be happy to share my contact information. People can email me, and I would be happy to answer questions or support in whatever way I can.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and just the tremendous work and courage that you have in doing this type of work and advocating and speaking up in the South Asian community, just educating and talking about trauma and mental health.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Their feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.